What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Turnbuckle Topics podcast. I'm your host, Pat Deneen, and this is my review of Night 2 of the WWE Draft, which took place on Monday Night Raw. Gotta say, I think we'd all admit that this was much better than Night 1. Not only did we get more draft picks, but it was just a lot more changes. You know, going from Raw to SmackDown, SmackDown to Raw, a lot more NXT call-ups. So we're going to go over everything start to finish. And there were 9 draft picks that also took place after Raw went off air. Gotta say, I also like this draft a little bit more because I did better. You know, Raw I went 7-5, SmackDown 8-4, overall 15-9, not including the picks that were made off of TV. So let's jump right into Monday Night Raw. Round 1 was completely both Raw and SmackDown. All 4 picks were announced by Stephanie McMahon. Always great to see Steph. And the very first pick was given to Monday Night Raw, and that was Gunther and Ludwig Kaiser of Imperium. Now, I did have Gunther going in the first round, that's for sure. He almost had a 2-year Intercontinental Championship reign. He's well on his way to world title gold sooner than later, probably before year's end. And it's official. Giovanni Vinci has been axed. He's out of Imperium. We find out later in the night where he goes on his own. And so it's Gunther, Ludwig Kaiser, Imperium. They are still together. Will they add a third member in Giovanni Vinci's place? We soon will see. Now, the second pick for Monday Night Raw was all 4 members of Damage Control, that being Io Sky, Asuka, and Kairi Sane, the Kabuki Warriors, the WWE Women's Tag Team Champions. Not for long, not once, we hit Saturday at Backlash. We all know Bianca and Jade are going to be taking those titles off of them, that's for sure, like it or not. And the fourth and final member, Dakota Kai. So all 4 members of Damage Control remaining together, going from the Blue Brand in SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. Now, jumping over to SmackDown, their first 2 picks were Jade Cargill, which, you kind of assumed that, the way they've been promoting her and presenting her, that she was going to go early in the draft. I did have her going in the first round, and that was followed by Kevin Owens. So I got to say, not to toot my own horn or anything, but there were 2 times during this draft where I got the whole round right for the entirety of a brand, and I had Jade Cargill, Kevin Owens, both going in the first round. And I mean, again, back to the women's tag title situation here. If it's not telling already that Jade and Bianca are going to dethrone the Kabuki Warriors, I mean, look, on SmackDown Friday, the very first pick of the overall draft, not just SmackDown, was Bianca Belair. And the very first pick for SmackDown was Jade Cargill. So, I mean, these 2 are not only headed for gold, but they'll probably have a pretty lengthy reign as tag team champions as well. Jumping ahead to round 2 here, we had YouTube streamer, I believe his name is iShowSpeed, came out and he announced that CM Punk will be remaining on Raw. That was the first pick of the second round. And Braun Strowman, the returning Braun Strowman, as I suspected he would be back. He was on the graphic for this draft in Monday's draft pool. He's on Monday Night Raw. It's always great to see him. And so Punk and Strowman were the second round picks. As far as SmackDown was concerned, Logan Paul, the United States champion, announced who was going to be making their way to SmackDown. And the Pride, Bobby Lashley, the Street Profits, and B-Fab. Now, I did think the Pride was going to make their way over to Monday Night Raw. However, they're staying put on SmackDown. And the second pick of the second round for SmackDown was Tiffany Stratton. As I fully anticipated, she would remain on the Blue Brand. I don't think she's going to win this Saturday at Backlash in that triple threat versus Bayley and Naomi. I do have Bayley retaining, but that title is hers sooner or later. Again, whether it's if Tiffany goes and wins Money in the Bank later this summer and cashes in at some point in time, maybe even that night, I do see Tiffany Stratton as the new WWE Women's Champion before the summer's over. That's for sure. So I totally expected her to remain on SmackDown. So we're going to round 3 here, back to Monday Night Raw. We had the APA making their way out. We saw JBL this past Friday on SmackDown, and here he was again with Ron Simmons, a.k.a. Farouk. So JBL announced the 2 picks for Monday Night Raw in the third round. And we have the LWO. We have Rey Mysterio, Zelina Vega, Dragon Lee. We have Cruz del Toro. Who else? Joaquin Wilde. And they also announced Carlito as part of the LWO. We all know last Friday on SmackDown, Carlito turned on Dragon Lee and Rey Mysterio when the footage was aired by Elektra Lopez and Santos Escobar, that Carlito was the one, indeed, that attacked Dragon Lee, which is why Andrade replaced Dragon Lee for the WrestleMania match. And so it's going to be very interesting. They're going to keep that storyline going on Monday Night Raw, being that they all moved over there together. Now, the second pick of the third round for Monday Night Raw was Drew McIntyre. Now, we saw later in the night on Monday Night Raw that Drew McIntyre was very unhappy, not only that he went in the third round, but that he went after CM Punk, who was picked in the second round. Those two had some very interesting back and forth exchanges throughout the course of the night. When Drew was on the ramp, CM Punk was in one of the suites. When Drew finally got to the suite, Punk was in the center of the ring. So that's going to be a very funny and interesting storyline on Monday Night Raw, as it's been for months now, right? You know, Drew McIntyre hurt CM Punk at the Royal Rumble. CM Punk ended up costing Drew McIntyre his World Championship reign at WrestleMania 40. He only held the belt for a couple of minutes. And so these two going back and forth is going to be a lot of fun. Now, as far as round 3 was concerned for Friday Night SmackDown, Ron Simmons announced that Legado del Fantasma will remain on SmackDown, as I suspected they would, and that Shinsuke Nakamura also is making his way to Friday Night SmackDown from Monday Night Raw. I thought that would be a good change of pace for Nakamura as well. And so there we have it. Now, we're halfway through the draft at this point. We're midway through. No NXT call-ups yet. I was kind of surprised at that, but it wouldn't be much longer until we finally got some NXT talent on the red and the blue brand. So here we had round 4, going to Monday Night Raw. Teddy Long, he announced that all 3 remaining members of Judgment Day, that being Dominic Mysterio, Finn Balor, and JD McDonough, would be making their way and remaining on Monday Night Raw. We already knew Damian Priest was going to be on Raw regardless, being that all champions will stay with the brand, which I love, and he's the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Now, the second pick of the 4th round for Monday Night Raw was the Mad Dragon, former NXT champion Ilya Dragunov, and I love this pick. You know, the reason I really love this pick is because this was a round where I had both of these actually in the 4th round, ironically enough, not even on purpose, but Judgment Day and the Mad Dragon both in round 4, and that's where we had it. And so he's going to add so much to this Monday Night Raw roster. It's going to be a lot of fun, you know, being back going up against Gunther. Will he join Gunther, as I mentioned on the previous episode, as the 3rd member of Imperium? So we have a lot to look forward to there. It's a very exciting time. So round 4 for Friday Night SmackDown, Medusa announced that Naomi would remain on SmackDown, which I was a little surprised at for a couple of reasons. I thought she was going to go to Monday Night Raw. And the other pick is Chelsea Green and Piper Niven, also making their way from Monday Night Raw to SmackDown, which I didn't have that. I thought they were going to keep them on Raw, but either or, nice change of scenery for them. I don't really think it's going to benefit them or they're going to get any kind of push because they're going to be on the same brand as the new WWE Women's Tag Team Champions in Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. So, you know, they're just going to, unfortunately, be taking more L's. And, you know, Chelsea's already racked up a couple of losses to Jade Cargill in the past couple of weeks in singles and in tag team action. Jumping to round 5, back to Monday Night Raw. We have the Dudley Boys. We saw them on Friday Night SmackDown. Always good to see Bubba Ray and Devon. So Bubba Ray Dudley for Monday Night Raw announced that the New Day would remain on Monday Night Raw, which I was surprised at that. I thought they were going to put them on SmackDown, being they've been on Raw for quite a bit, but they kept them on Raw. And yet again, we had another NXT call-up, which I loved. Another former NXT champion, by the way, Lyra Valkyria. Huge fan of her work. She's had a fantastic year in NXT, even prior to being champion. Of course, she eventually dethroned Becky Lynch, one of her idols, while she was, on the come-up, both natives of Ireland. And so that's awesome to see. She was very grateful, very excited. Her and Dragunov both ready to make their impression felt on Raw, and that they will. So all NXT selections went to Raw except Carmelo Hayes up till this point. If you remember, Kiana James was drafted Friday to Monday Night Raw. Carmelo obviously being picked in the first round with SmackDown on Friday. But since then, they've all been going to Raw, but we will see one or two go to SmackDown later in the night. Now we're going to round 5 on Friday Night SmackDown, where Devon Dudley announced both people or both teams. And we have Pretty Deadly remaining on SmackDown, which I thought they would be making their way over to Monday Night Raw. Again, just the change of scenery would be nice, but that's not what we got. And then we had Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell making their way from Monday Night Raw to Friday Night SmackDown, which I suspected. Again, another heel tag team in Candice and Indy, much like Chelsea and Piper. And again, another tag team that's probably going to unfortunately suffer quite a few losses. Again, going to be on the same brand as those new women's tag team champions in Bianca and Jade. So Bianca and Jade are just going to run through these teams. Sorry to say, but that's just the fact of the matter. Now we're going to the final round here. We're going to round 6, Monday Night Raw. We see both GMs make their way out. Raw GM Adam Pearce, SmackDown GM Nick Aldis, and Raw GM Adam Pearce announces that the Final Testament, now this really caught me off guard here, it really did, that the Final Testament, Karrion Kross, Scarlett, AOP, and Paul Ellering will be making their way from Friday Night SmackDown, technically, they're still members of that roster, to Monday Night Raw. And the reason that caught me off guard, as I mentioned in a previous episode, is I thought that it would be beneficial for the entirety of that faction to remain on SmackDown for a little bit. I really think that's the best move for them, to gain some momentum, to establish themselves as a true powerhouse to be taken seriously later tonight, night 2 of NXT Spring Break-In. AOP will be going up against Nathan Frazier and Axiom for those NXT Tag Team titles, which, in my opinion, even though it's only been a couple of weeks they've been champion, I thought it would be the best bet to put those titles on AOP. You know, they won those titles back in, 2016 or something like that, 2017, those tag titles, and make them 2-time champs, and then eventually get Karrion Kross to hold the NXT Championship. I think that's the best way to go. But again, it seems, even though they are technically drafted to Raw, doesn't mean they can't spend some time on NXT, because the fact of the matter is, if they're champions for said brand, they have to appear. So their home could be Raw, but for the time being, we've seen it numerous times through the last year or two, people from Raw or SmackDown spent some time on NXT. We saw it with Becky Lynch, right? Becky Lynch was champion for a couple of months, and although her home, quite literally just like this situation here, was Monday Night Raw, she had to make her appearances on NXT on pretty much a weekly basis, being that she was the champion for that brand. So I'm kind of hoping that's what happens. You know, it's smart, I guess, in a way, to keep them on Raw, as that's their home base, but, at the same time, they could dabble in NXT, especially if championship opportunities or title defenses is exactly what they got to do. So that was a little surprising. And then Big Bronson Reed was the final pick for Monday Night Raw. Again, I saw him going to SmackDown. Thought that'd be nice. Eventual U.S. champion, maybe, behind the likes of, L.A. Knight eventually defeating Logan Paul this summer. And then somebody taking it off of L.A. Knight eventually, looking way in advance here, would be the likes of a Bronson Reed. But I guess they have other plans for him. Now, moving over to Friday Night SmackDown, SmackDown GM Nick Aldis announced the final 2 picks, not only for SmackDown for the night, but for the entirety of the televised draft. Again, we got 9 picks after Raw went off air, which I'll, go over following these 2 picks. So the first pick of the 6th round for SmackDown was DIY, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, which I suggested was a good idea, making their way from Raw to SmackDown. And hey, maybe they'll have better luck winning tag team gold over there against the likes of a Austin Theory and a Grayson Waller, A-Town Down Under, which is a great name, by the way. I think that would be good. I think that would be a great team to eventually dethrone them, maybe in Johnny Gargano's hometown of Cleveland, Ohio this summer at SummerSlam. I think that's a fantastic place to do so, and that's a pretty good title reign for Waller and Theory, holding the titles from WrestleMania 40 all the way to SummerSlam, better part of 4 months or so, give or take. So that's what I see happening. I see them dethroning them, becoming the new tag team champions. Plus, I think most of us would agree those tag team titles are nicer than the newer ones. I mean, I love the fact that WWE has new tag titles on Raw and SmackDown, but the ones Miz and R-Truth hold are not nearly as nice as the classic look of the ones on SmackDown. So the final pick of the night on Monday Night Raw for SmackDown was NXT call-up Blair Davenport. Again, this was an NXT prospect I did see making their way to the main roster, namely SmackDown, as I said on the preview, and it's a fantastic pick. I think at this point, this was only the second NXT call-up to go to SmackDown. The majority, those 3 or 4 picks, went to Raw. So she joins Carmelo Hayes, making their way from NXT to Friday Night SmackDown. Very happy and excited for Blair Davenport. She's going to do great there. She's got a real vicious side. She's got a real mean streak in her. And so that was the conclusion of the televised draft. So I'm going to jump right into these 9 draft picks that took place following Monday Night Raw. And it goes as follows. Odyssey Jones, as far as I recall, he was already on the Monday Night Raw roster, followed by Natalya, again, already on the Raw roster. Kaden Carter and Katana Chance. I thought it'd be nice for them to make their way over to SmackDown for a change of pace, but yet again, they will remain on the Monday Night Raw roster. Apollo Crews, which we haven't seen in a very long time. I think we saw him maybe a month and a half ago. That was Andrade's official return match in singles, and that was the last time I remember seeing him. So Apollo's going from Raw to SmackDown, much like Andrade. And then we saw another NXT call-up going to Monday Night Raw. He's been on Raw before, but unfortunately it was in Retribution, known as T-Bar, and he's looking for a clean slate. He's coming as himself, Dominik Dijakovic, better known as Dijak now. Again, somebody with a vicious side. And he did a great job in NXT the past year and a half. Fantastic job. Although I don't think he held any gold. He was in many a North American Championship match opportunity, NXT Championship opportunity, going up against whether it was Wes Lee or Dragunov. He had some brutal fights. And so I think he's going to do just fine if he's booked the way he was in NXT, back on the main roster this time, getting a second chance, much like Karrion Kross kind of got a second chance on Monday Night Raw. Following that, Tegan Nox making her way from Monday Night Raw to SmackDown. Now, this is somebody who's been lost in the shuffle for years, ever since she left NXT. She was drafted to SmackDown, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. Didn't really see her much, a few times. She made her way out with Shotzi Blackheart when they were still a tag team. You got to remember that Tegan Nox was the one kind of who replaced Ember Moon, because they kept Ember Moon when she was still on. They kept her on NXT at the time before she had left the company, because Shotzi and Ember Moon were a tag team for a while. But when they called Shotzi up, they paired her with Tegan. They had a good run, looking like they were going to do something with them, make them potential tag team champs. Never happened. Tegan, at that following draft, went to Raw. Didn't see her. She got released. Came back last year. We've seen her on Raw in dribs and drabs and singles and battle royales, teaming with Natalya. And so hopefully this run for her on SmackDown is significant. I mean, really, we haven't seen much of her, and she's got a great upside. We all know it. The New Catch Republic, Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate, making their way from Friday Night SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. That's a great get for Raw in that whole tag division. Again, much like DIY, they haven't held tag gold yet on the main roster. Granted, they haven't been together nearly as long as DIY, as far as, being on Raw or SmackDown. But I'd love to see them get some tag team gold eventually on Raw as well. And this was probably one of the most intriguing picks that we saw following Monday Night Raw, as far as announcements of who's going where. And we got to see that Giovanni Vinci, formerly of Imperium, is drafted to SmackDown. As I said, that's a great move. Separate him from Imperium quite literally after being kicked out last week. Gunther and Ludwig were the first pick of Raw. And although Giovanni Vinci wasn't announced on the televised draft of Night 2, it's okay. He could still leave a huge impact. Glad he's not necessarily being sent down to NXT, where this character first came about 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago on NXT 2.0, after they renamed him from being Fabian Eichner to Giovanni Vinci. So if they push him on SmackDown in the mid-card, he could certainly make some noise. That's for sure. And I believe this was the final pick, the ninth pick of following Monday Night Raw. And also remaining on Monday Night Raw, the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile staying as a unit, which I suggested they should do. I did think, however, they were going to go to SmackDown for a change of pace, but they want to keep them together on Raw. That's good for Maxine Dupree. That means that Ivy Nile can still be in Maxine's corner, quite literally, either as a, kind of like a manager or some motivation, or as a tag partner if they want to run tag once in a while still. And so that was pretty much that. And that was Night 2 of the WWE Draft 2024. Again, this draft was much better, Night 2, than Night 1. Again, we saw a lot more changes, a lot more selections. So to be fair, we got to see a lot more movement. Quite a few call-ups. Most of the call-ups that I thought we would have seen happened. Trying to think who did not make their way up that I thought. I know I mentioned Fallon Henley, but I'm not surprised that they kept her in NXT. I was just going out on a limb there, but they brought up Dragunov. They brought up Valkyria, Davenport. The only one I was probably surprised about was Kiana James, but she could still make noise. I thought they were going to keep her in NXT a little longer, but she'll do just fine. And so we found out on Monday Night Raw this past week that the King of the Ring tournament will begin on the May 6th episode of Raw. That's, of course, next week. And as previously announced, WWE will hold the King and Queen of the Ring in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, later this month, May 25th. Also next Monday will be the first day that the new WWE Draft rosters will be in full effect. So that's why we saw Nia Jax on Monday Night Raw this past week, even though she was drafted to SmackDown on Friday. She was still eligible to be on that brand, just like this Friday. Whoever you see on SmackDown that was drafted to Raw, we could see them yet again one more time following, or prior to rather, Backlash this Saturday. So a lot to look forward to. You know, we got SmackDown this Friday, Backlash on Saturday in France, and then, of course, Monday, these new rosters go in full effect. And we'll see what happens. We'll see these new feuds, hopefully new storylines, new people in the title picture, number one contenders, and that's pretty much that. You know, I'll get into my predictions later in the week as far as Backlash is concerned. I've obviously said numerous times that I do think Jade and Bianca will be the new tag team champions. That's probably the only title that I see changing hands this weekend. You know, I do think Cody retains. I see Bayley retaining. Damian Priest retaining against Jey Uso. I love main event Jey Uso, but I don't think they're going to put that on him. And I could see some funny business happening in that match, though, costing him, because every time Jey is in a title opportunity in general, I won't even just say singles, but, you know, usually it's Jimmy screwing it up for him, whether it's the Universal title over the summer or the tag titles or the Intercontinental title. All three of those times in the last 6 months, 7 months was Jimmy Uso. But now, could we see somebody else interfere? Could we see the new Bloodline interfere? Solo, Tama Tonga, see Paul Heyman come out to some capacity. If we do see Jimmy, I don't think it's going to be against Jey. I think, if anything, he'll be there as an ally. And could we see a new debuting member this Saturday at Backlash? Could we see the likes of a Jacob Fatu? It's been rumored he's going to be showing up sooner than later, sometime in the month of May. Will it be early May or late May? Potentially, he could show up, at the King of the Ring event, King and Queen of the Ring in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. But so we'll see what happens there. But long story short, I do see all champions retaining, that's for sure. And yeah, that's pretty much that. So as always, thank you for tuning in to the Turnbuckle Topics podcast. I'm your host, Pat Deneen, and I hope you enjoyed this review. All the previews and reviews of Night 1 and Night 2 of the 2024 WWE Draft. And again, I'll be back later on this week with my predictions for Backlash this Saturday and so on. So thank you as always, guys. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.